Well, it just so happened that one of my classmates, Ken Greenwood, was a Peel Regional Police officer, and Ken had just immigrated to Canada from serving in Rhodesia's police force, which was called the British South Africa Police Force. And it had its origins in the creation of the British South Africa Company, which had received a charter from Queen Victoria in the late 1800s to take over what is now known as Zimbabwe, mining and mineral concession rights, that sort of thing, in order to expand the British Empire's influence and I suppose their financial well-being
Sure.
as well.
So that was their interest in Rhodesia, were the mines.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, mining, mineral. I don't think they truly understood just how great an agricultural prize it was, but eventually they did.
Yeah.
The fabric of this shirt, which is my issue shirt from the Rhodesian conflict, serving in the Rhodesian army, was made from cotton grown in Rhodesia, and the fabric is like it's still like it's brand new.
Yeah, it looks good.
I got a couple pinholes in the back where some larvae or bugs got in there and had a little bit of a feast, but otherwise it is still super. Like if they made garments like this nowadays, boy.
Yeah, they don't. No.
So Ken Greenwood pipes up and he said to Carl Moffat, he said, well, you know, that country's under UN sanctions. They don't have the ability to reach out and vet people who come to serve in their army. So they got into a bit of a lively discussion, tete-a-tete back and forth in the class. And it just so happened that Ken's room was right beside my room, and there were 3 or 4 other expats, they called them, expats, who had served in places like one of them had been a Royal Ulster Constabulary Inspector, another one had been a Royal Marine, another one was a London Metropolitan Bobby, and they used to gather at Ken's room after class and drink, you know, which was forbidden, and my room's right beside them, so they would invite me in, and they'd be like, "How old are you?" And I'm like, 19. And these guys are all in their 30s, you know, some of them pushing maybe closer to 40. Worldly guys, you know, they'd been everywhere, seen everything. And so I was in awe of them. And they used to say, "You're too young to be a policeman. You should go and join the Rhodesian Army or the BSAP." And so that was 1976. And in the ensuing 2 years, I began to pay attention in the news media about what was going on in Rhodesia. And eventually, after watching the streetlights go on and off in Schaumburg, Ontario, in Patrol Area 122, which is about as rural as you're going to find anywhere in Canada, and rounding up stray cows, I began to realize that they were right.
Yeah.
So in December of 1978, I quit York Regional Police. And by January of 1979, I had flown to Rhodesia with my brother. And I ended up joining the Rhodesian Army. And my brother ended up coming back to Canada the day after we landed.
Really? Why did he leave? They only needed one?
You know, it's hard to say. My brother had no previous military or police background. He was 7, 8 years older than me. I think in a way he kind of thought he had to look after his little brother, that kind of thing. But at the same time, like many Canadians during the Vietnam War era, which he would have been old enough to serve in, guys would get drunked up on the weekends, and they'd drive down to the recruiting office in Buffalo, which is right an hour's drive, hour and a half's drive from where we lived. And they'd show up at the recruiting office and, you know, sign on the dotted line, come back home to Canada, get sober, and go, "Oh,
never mind."
We did have one individual from the small town I grew up in, Nobleton, Ontario, Doug Ransom, who actually did join the U.S. Marine Corps. and he served as a combat photographer and was in the very first landings of the U.S. Marine Corps in Vietnam when they came ashore on landing craft, totally unopposed.
Mm-hmm.
And a number of his photos are in the U.S. Marine Corps records or publications showing these landings. And Doug was there taking photographs. Later on, when he finished his tour or his service in the Marine Corps, he came back to Canada and had a 30-plus year career in Metropolitan Toronto Police Force before he retired. Still alive. I'm in contact with him occasionally on Facebook, but there was one guy from our town that actually did it.
Yeah.
And still alive to talk about it.
What was the impression that you had of the Vietnam War? What were you... what do you remember
I was
about that?
A young adolescent. It was in the news all the time.
Did you pay much attention to it?
Well, my father, who was pretty conservative, had been a pilot in World War II in the Royal Canadian Air Force, spent 3 years in Great Britain. He was like, oh, those commie protesters, they're all being influenced by the communist subversion of the United States and that sort of thing. So I kind of paid attention through my father.
Mm-hmm.
And I was old enough to start reading news and paying attention to it, but I was too young to actually serve, and I really had no thought of doing that.
Sure, you'd be like 10, something like that.
Born in
10 and younger.
I would be between 10 and 15 years of age, 10 to 16 years of age before the pullout of the United States from Vietnam. Yeah, so certainly a hot topic, but
sure.
We didn't know very little. There was very little knowledge of Canadians who had gone to serve in the U.S. forces, of which I understand there were approximately 40,000. And we have a monument in Windsor, Ontario called the North Wall. And there are about 500 names of Canadians who were killed in action serving in the U.S. forces during the Vietnam War. So, yeah.
What was your impression? Did you know what to expect when you got to Rhodesia? What was the infrastructure and the people or the culture? What did you notice?
Through my friendship with Ken Greenwood, Ken gave me lots of good information about what to expect, where to go, who to see. Ken thought that I should try out for the BSAP. And
what is that?
The British South Africa Police Force. They would be, in Canada, they would be equivalent to our RCMP in Canada, which is a national police force.
Okay.
And that's what they had in Rhodesia at the time. It was a national police force. There were no municipal police forces or anything.
But it was the British police force.
Well, it was called the British South Africa Police Force because it evolved out of the British South Africa Company.
Okay.
That was given the charter to create Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe.
But it was in support of Rhodesia.
Yes. Yeah. Even though people people get confused because the British South Africa Police Force, you think, well, South Africa, which nothing to do with South Africa,
right? Yeah.
So Ken thought that I should do that, but I had been given a couple of books. There was actually a lobbying group in Toronto called the Friends of Rhodesia Society. It was run by a librarian by the name of Jean Housen. She was a school librarian in the Toronto District Public School Board. A very interesting lady. She was actually given a civilian award by the Rhodesian government later on, a gazetted award. I can't remember what it was called. For her role in trying to publicize the Rhodesian side of the conflict, which of course had, was widely perceived as being a white minority, white supremacist group of people lording it over the majority African population.
Really? The Rhodesian side was perceived that way?
Well, the world viewed Rhodesia as that.
Okay.
Because in November 11th, 1965, it was actually called the British colony of Southern Rhodesia, and they declared their unilateral declaration of independence and technically rebelled against Great Britain. And that was what led to the beginning of the outright hostilities and conflict that eventually created what was known as the Bush War.
Okay.
From 1965 to 1980.
Okay.
So,
but you didn't join them, right?
No, I had been given a really good book called Contact, and in that book it listed all the names and numbers and units of people who had been killed in active service so far. And when I was going through that, I noticed there was one group that had a tiny fraction of the killed in active service statistics, and that was the Rhodesian Special Air Service Regiment. So I started reading up a bit about it. I wasn't really much into military stuff. I'm a policeman at the time. I was competing as what they called PPC revolver shooting competition, and I was doing that at the time for the York Regional Police Revolver Club. But I didn't really know much about soldiering at all. And so I thought, I looked at other units, like the British South Africa Police Force was heavily overrepresented in the casualty lists.
Really?
And I'm like, I'm going to try for the Special Air Service. So that was what was in my head when I went down there. And I went to the recruiting office. I went to both recruiting depots, Morris Depot for the BSAP in Salisbury. It's now Harare. And then I went to the Army recruiting office, and they both took me. And they said, go back to your hotel room because it's the last weekend you're going to see. Enjoy your weekend.
Oh, wow.
And so while I was there, I'm like, I'm going to go with the Army. So I went to the Army recruiting office after the end of the weekend, presented myself, got on the local transport to the Special Air Service barracks, which was on the edge of Salisbury International Airport.